How many times did we hear our parents lament what they perceived to be the deteriorating quality of children's entertainment? How many times did we hear our mom or dad mutter how television is going to hell? Hasbro heard them and said, "Hold my beer."
Oh, swell. This is the result of years of mindless entertainment. The evil that lies within.
In 1986, Hasbro's G.I. Joe was reaching the zenith of its sales power. Their My Little Pony line continued to rake in sales. Transformers had effectively crushed the GoBots by this point. They introduced Jem to compete with Barbie, and their other big reveal for 1986 was something called Inhumanoids. The line consisted of various scales of plastic primordial demons. The heroes that would fight them were practically an afterthought. I confess I recall seeing the toy commercials far more than I saw the animated series. Apparently, the show ran alongside Jem, Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines, and Robotics as part of a Super Sunday cartoon block, which explains why I never saw it because I was always in church. Incidentally, Jem and Inhumanoids were the only shows popular enough to move out of this Super Sunday thing and get dedicated series of their own. Although only Jem was worthy enough to get an official DVD release in the US. The Inhumanoids DVD is a UK release. Created by Flint Dille in 1986, the man that infamously killed Optimus Prime that same year, Inhumanoids is hard to describe and even more difficult to comprehend. So to set the stage for you, I've brought in a lifelong Inhumanoids fan and expert, my friend Matt Swaford of Reklaimers Vintage Toys on Instagram.
The arcing story is the Inhumanoids, the three main Inhumanoids. There are a few other ones that are introduced and created, are Metlar, Decompose, and Tendril. They all run different kingdoms in the Earth's core. You know, eons ago, millions of years ago, whatever, they were imprisoned by a different race of Inhumanoids called the Mutors that are, you know, trees that are sentient, that are still alive, and they hide in our forests as trees. And then the Granites, which are basically like sentient rock creatures. They were imprisoned and defeated by them.
Though our losses were great, we defeated them and drove them into submission.
And so it's that reawakening of ancient evil. That's pretty much the beginning of the show, and then it's all about, oh crap, they're unleashed. This group of scientists circumstantially is just kind of in the middle of it, where it's like, oh wow, these things that we found, they called us in because we're experts, now we have to deal with it. It's almost like Ghostbusters, where right place, right time, and they're like, hey, we're capable, we can do this, let's fix this problem. So they start researching and investigating, and you know, they decide, hey, we have to stop these things. And it was such a fantastical thing in that show's universe that even though, you know, the cops and the military and things like that were called in, they were still the de facto experts, because they pretty much hit it at ground zero and were like, okay, we understand more about these things than anybody else, so we're the ones that have to deal with it. So the overarch of the entire series is these things keep trying to rise to power, and it's the Earth core, the good guys are suppressing them, you know, driving them away, making them hide in the earth until they can figure out how to deal with them ultimately.
So we've got Herc Armstrong in Big Sur, California, the leader of the government-funded Earth Corps, think federally mandated geological Ghostbusters type group. Herc has just found a massive bestial skeleton trapped in amber in the redwood forest. A few states away, an evil guy named Blackthorn Shore is drilling deep into the earth for something, thanks to ancient documents.
So the ancient documents were right.
Their voice work is so strong and just terse and urgent. The scenes I love too is when they're finding Tendril, the evil villain in the show. Drill down 2 miles, and the guys, you know, the construction workers, like, oh, there's nothing down that far.
But there's nothing down that far.
And the evil industrialist with the eye patch is like, yes, there is.
Yes, there is.
Blackthorn manages to release the Inhumanoid Tendril from his ancient prison. At almost the very same time, Blackthorn's sister Sandra Shore hosts a ceremony honoring the 4 scientists of EarthCore and their discovery of the amber-encased beast. As predicted, the beast escapes the amber confinement, and we learn it is the Inhumanoid called Decompose, voiced by Chris Latta of Cobra Commander and Starscream fame.
Release me, Tendril!
The EarthCore do their Ghostbusters thing, getting into their gear in their big white vehicle so they can face the giant horrors and save the city.
All of the guys are capable. They're all educated, don't always necessarily get along. They have very different personality types.
Remember the vibes?
Vibes? Let's be a little more professional, Liquidator.
Well, then let's hear your theory.
All right.
But there's not, the big, strong, dumb guy and, the pencil neck geek. And I thought that was refreshing.
Matt's correct that there aren't any cliche differentiators for their personalities, but there are a few notable tells that keep them distinct. Herc, as the leader, is fairly easy to keep track of when watching. He's the all-American good guy.
EarthCore, suit up. We've got to stop them before they get to Metlar.
Then there's the dude with the beard, constantly asking people to refer to him as Liquidator, even though his name is John. He even makes mention of it on his answering machine.
Hi, this is John Slattery, otherwise known as Liquidator.
My understanding has always been that nicknames are supposed to be simpler to say than your actual name most of the time, and that other people give you those nicknames, you don't give them to yourself. John doesn't seem to understand these concepts, and he's traded a 1-syllable actual name for a 4-syllable nickname. I feel like he gave himself this nickname of Liquidator when he was 11 years old, and he's sticking with it no matter the social consequences.
I couldn't read the teleprompter.
That was wonderful, Liquidator.
Augur is the resident grump of the team. He habitually Khrushchev's television sets with his shoes while watching the news, and he really hates the media, something the series points out numerous times.
I hate reporters. I'm not scared of the Inhumanoids.
I'm talking about me, you media clown!
Interestingly, Augur's media nemesis, the Geraldo Rivera knockoff newscaster named Hector Ramirez of the tabloid show 20 Questions, is a common sight across Transformers, G.I. Joe, Jem, and Inhumanoids. So in essence, this was Hasbro's first attempt at a sort of cinematic universe. Augur is also not always himself, apparently. Finally, there's Dr. Bright, implied to be the biggest egghead of the EarthCore, the absent-minded genius with a lot of scientific knowledge but very little common sense.
Earth to Dr. Bright.
Oh, it's a doodle, I think. File it.
I'll file it.
Who in their right mind puts their hands on their butt when their arms are outfitted with jagged saw blades? And when you're one of only 4 people in the world that specialize in the study of and defense against ancient subterranean demons, and your entire headquarters was just recently demolished by said demons, and you get a radio mayday from your ally, who is a talking redwood tree screaming emergency, are you really going to ask them to describe the emergency?
Help, the bone job's after us. Emergency!
Describe the emergency.
Right. Your job is specialized to a molecular degree. If someone calls your office declaring an emergency, there is no reason to waste time asking them to describe that emergency. Get your butt out of that chair and get moving. And yeah, before you're that guy that tries to tell me I forgot this is Ace from G.I. Joe, I know. Ask me how much I care. While it can be said that Inhumanoids is unique as an 80s cartoon by dealing with more complex story ideas like corruption in the highest levels of government.
Very good, Senator. Now, give me the plans for all the EarthCore environmental suits and weapons.
Funny how he gives away the taxpayers' money as if it were his own.
We don't know how to thank you, Senator.
And heroes and villains making alliances.
Don't be a fool, Decompose! Metlar doesn't need you!
Much of what keeps Inhumanoids gray and arguably more sophisticated than the many good versus evil cartoons of the day also results in a show unable to define for the audience what it's really about.
Even some of the other fringe, not super popular stuff like Centurions and Sectars and things like that, those were irreverent, they were weird, they were different, but they weren't anything like this. It was hard horror for kids, but not really for kids. It was ballsy enough to be written for a mature audience, but aimed at children. And that's a hard sell.
And boy, did they ever. You've got 3 Inhumanoid villains with aims of making the world their domain again. But you also have the human villains of Blackthorn and Dr. Mangler, who also seem to want general chaos. And Blackthorn wants his own island kingdom or something.
I made a bargain with Metlar. We agreed that I would rule the few islands that would remain after the blast.
But I would think a guy that highly connected with powerful politicians could finagle a few islands without having to resort to resurrecting a demonic apocalypse to achieve it. Then again, Blackthorn isn't the most well-written villain.
I'm not sick. I'm evil.
Part of the reason that this show is kind of like, you know, kind of crazy and out there is Hasbro kind of knew that they weren't a huge hit. You know, parents groups were complaining. They were demonic, they were satanic, they were, you know, evil monsters. They were scaring their kids, whatever. Basically, I chalk it up to an overestimation of kids being able to say, "Hey, Mom, buy me that giant monster." There just wasn't enough lure for a lot of kids. And so Hasbro told, I believe it was Sunbow that was making the show, we're going to go ahead and scrap this toy line, but we're already contracted to do 12 episodes or whatever they ended up doing. I think it was 12. So as long as you don't break any rules or laws, do what you want.
The Earth Core is there to keep a lid on the uncorked Inhumanoids, and they have some tenuous help from the Mutors, a combination of the Redwoods and the Granites, both of whom look totally evil and generally don't get along with each other nor the Earth Core. The Redwoods even go full Treebeard on the Earth Core at first, refusing to help in the war with the Inhumanoids, despite being ticked off at the Earth Core for unwittingly freeing Decompose in the first place.
When the great wind blows, you must stand or fall with your own strength.
We must weather such things as we have always done.
Even your mighty people did not fight alone in the last great war. We need your help.
This is not our war.
But you're part of this world!
Metlar, walk the bridge! Or are you afraid of the abyss?
You shall not pass!
There is a kind of poetry to the Earth Core allied with rocks and trees.
I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne. Let my armies be the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky.
You've also got Magna Core, a magma man that splits into 2 distinct brothers, whose sole purpose appears to be keeping Metlar in a stasis field of their own making for all eternity. Not a great plan, and it ends up failing more than a few times over the short run of this series. Magna Core doesn't get along with the Earth Core.
The other humans are going to try to flood Infernax, and they are fools!
Earth Core doesn't get along with the Granites.
They call them flesh slugs.
Agree with the flesh slug.
Humans! We're called humans!
Which is a really derogatory term. That's an interesting thing, because you don't normally see that with the heroes where they're kind of downtrodden.
Blackthorn doesn't get along with the Inhumanoids. You get to the point where you just want something to hold on to that can ground the experience.
Do you fear death more than you fear me?
There's no stereotypes, there's no comic relief character, there's no snarf, there's no, doofy character to get them, oh no, we're in a jam. Now we gotta spend the rest of the episode getting out of it, which kind of befell so many of those properties and so many of those shows. This was an adult type show. There's people dying, and body horror, and cults, and zombies and, ancient evils, being locked away in the earth. And that kind of explains why they have a character fall into a river that's got toxic waste in it, and he basically melts away. And then he gets reanimated. There's a lot of body horror, a lot of kind of stark, oh my God, this is a kid's show. The only female in the show pretty much joins the team almost immediately. And she puts on a suit. She's not sitting at a desk. So she was part of the team. And she goes through some of the worst body horror in that show.
If you're a horror fan, you'll love this show for that aspect alone. I have no doubt. The writers pull no punches when it comes to undead creatures, gore, and the fear factor. But that aesthetic window dressing does nothing to alleviate the narrative chaos. For example, right after the end of the opening miniseries, we find out Blackthorn was sentenced to only 5 years in prison. The guy colluded with corrupt politicians and tried to destroy the planet for his own personal gain with the help of ancient giant demons. But he only gets 5 years in prison? Not that it matters, because he escapes in a day and a half anyway. And at the first press conference with the Earth Corps after the Inhumanoids are pushed back at the end of the opening miniseries, the Earth Corps seems to be very cavalier about revealing a lot of detailed intelligence that I think would be better kept out of the public eye for security reasons.
Don't tell them about the trees!
Then again, the Earth Corps also didn't keep a tight enough lid on their own bio-waste and allowed a sample of Tendril's flesh to grow into an entirely new Tendril monster. So they're not exactly the most responsible professionals.
A small piece of the Tendril monster is missing. Is it important? Who knows?
Also, why does Tendril run like Laura Ingalls from the end credits of Little House on the Prairie? The leader of the Inhumanoids, Metlar, fights by puking up fireballs and throwing them at people. One would think he would also have a legion of lava men or something at his command. Not even close. He brings statues to life that fight for him. Greek statues, European statues, Civil War statues. You get the picture. All the while, the Earth Corps and the Mutors attempt to suppress Metlar. That is, until they need his help against Blackthorn.
You filthy black slug! This is betrayal!
Other times, they need the other Inhumanoids' help against Metlar. There are a lot of temporary alliances in this show. By the last few episodes of the series, things go off the rails in unimaginable ways, including an episode where all of the Inhumanoids fall in love. Tendril falls in love with a movie actress. Decompose falls in love with the zombified version of Sandra Shore, and Metlar falls in love with the Statue of Liberty and brings it to life so he can marry her. But she proves to be a total shrew and makes it clear she won't satisfy his marital impulses until Metlar meets her standards.
If you're expecting me to do the big hits with you'd better clean up your act.
My God. This is a kid's show, people. Late in the series, we find out that Metlar had a prior boss named Slither, who apparently ordered him eons ago to build the pyramids in Egypt for him. And in the last episode, we learn that the Earth Corps have all become shallow fame seekers who celebrate their success by drinking what looks like motor oil, while shirking their responsibilities to the planet, even as every indication points to a looming crisis.
Either the Redwoods are here, or we've got some serious termite problems.
I'm also not sure why a Quonset hut would have a termite problem, given they're made entirely of steel frames, but whatever. The only Earth Corps scientist not yet blessed with celebrity is Augur, and he's ticked about it.
Yeah, it seems you're all too busy to fight the Inhumanoids, so I'm gonna do it myself. How come everybody else is famous and respected but me?
So he decides to run for president of the United States. And wins.
All I can say is I'm glad I punched that bozo's lights out. He was a loser from square one.
And that might be the biggest problem of all with Inhumanoids. The heroes aren't memorable or likable. In fact, no one in the show is likable. Wait a minute, that sounds like...
Congressman Gary Lund, who describes himself as a conservative liberal.
The series was created by Flint Dille, a guy who seems to have some personal issues with the media and politics if this show is any indication, and by extension weird ideas about the Statue of Liberty, and he let it spill out into a children's cartoon in the fall of 1986.
What a jerk! What a hack!
Is there anything about these heroes a kid can enjoy?
They're all tough guys, but they're scientists. And you know, as a kid, it's like it made me want to be like a tough guy scientist, where it's like, hey, you know, you can be this, but not the stereotypical nerd, where it's like, oh, I'm figuring things out.
I'll give it that. The show does make some attempts to impress upon viewers that these heroes are not soldiers, despite having laser guns. They are, like the Ghostbusters, scientists. Admittedly, though, the writers only make occasional efforts to explore the science aspect of the story.
It's one of those shows where I constantly have to tell people how awesome it is. Like, oh, you've never seen Inhumanoids?
It's a series that wants to be smarter and edgier than its contemporaries. But for every area where it succeeds at that goal, it makes truly boneheaded narrative and structural mistakes in others. Huh, that looks familiar. Hello, Mike. What do you have for us for today's Invention Exchange? Well, for today's Invention Exchange, we've prepared toys based on Inhumanoids. What do you think, sirs? Hope you enjoyed that, everybody. If you want to see more videos about cartoon scientists, you can watch our Real Ghostbusters playlist here. And if you'd like an alternative to that, you can watch our Filmation Ghostbusters videos here. And now I've got to figure out how to do Inhumanoids Part 2 before these things come alive. And I think they're moving.